Hello there and welcome to the latest edition of the Tyre Kickers. We're the ones that annoy classic car dealers so you don't have to.
In this episode, the bedroom poster child, the Porsche 911 Turbo, is getting more expensive by the minute. So can you still buy a forced induction classic, but on the cheap?
Also, retro road trips. Remember, no aircon, no sat-nav and no screens? But was driving in the old days more of an adventure?
Plus, more auction action as we chew over the results from a couple of big ones and see what's selling and what's sticking to the sale room floor. So wave your paddle in the air as we hammer out episode 22 of the Tyre Kickers.
Well, yes, so we're back at the Tyre Kickers Global HQ again after the excitement of the NEC Classic Motor Show up in Birmingham. It was a lot of fun to do, actually, our live special edition up there. Thanks to Andrea and all of the NEC PR team who made it all happen. The podcast lounge that they set up worked really well. Thanks to our special guest, Paul Cowland, really nice guy, and we had a good bit of banter with him on the show. If you've not heard the show, go back to a couple of previous episodes and you'll hear it there. The only person missing, though, from the whole show is you, Max. Have you recovered? Oh, here we go.
I am an official man flu survivor. I was thinking, actually, if we did a podcast about surviving man flu, we might win an award.
That's next year's entry.
I'm still here. Thank you for your get well soon card, by the way.
Well, I was busy. Yeah, some people had to do the work of two people.
Still waiting for that to pop through the post.
Well, the post is a bit slow these days.
So how did you get on then? You enjoyed it?
Yeah, it was good. It was really, really good. It was a lot of running around to get it done. It was the first year they'd done this podcast lounge. So I think all of us involved, and we saw some of the other podcasters as well, everybody was sort of a bit unsure how it's going to work, but it seemed to work really, really well. Thank you if you were in the audience and came. Surprisingly, it was almost a full house. I think somebody got up and left when I said that you weren't there, or maybe they just got confused that they were in the wrong place in the first place. But it was just a bit of a whirlwind, a bit of a rush getting everything done, running around the show, getting the content, and then coming back. But Paul Callum was great. Thank you, Paul, for sitting in and being a good foil to me and having a good bit of banter, which was really good. And it was really nice to meet a few of you after the show as well. So thank you for coming up. So that was really good. But it's a really big show, Max. It sort of felt bigger than it was last year, although people said it was still in the same amount of halls. But it was the 40th anniversary show. There was like 3,000 cars there. So I think you need a couple of days to do it all, actually, now. It's got so big that I just don't think you can really smash it in one day.
And did you go to the auction and have a look at the stuff?
I didn't get a chance to sort of follow the cars, but some of them went for big numbers, didn't they?
Yeah, I was really surprised about the figures next to fast Fords in particular. There was one over 200,000 for a diamond white 3-door Escort Cosworth Lux. Okay, so it had 2,000 miles on the clock and it was guided between 80 and 100,000. But it went through to reach 180,000 plus fees, so 202,000. Did you see that? I mean, a Cosworth for 200,000?
Well, Paul mentioned this on the show, and I expected I thought I'll go and have a look at it afterwards and expected to see this, wow, trophy car. And look at it, I've put a picture on your screen. It's the most unremarkable 200 grand car I've ever seen.
Just imagine taking that home and saying, darling, look at what I've bought for 200,000. You whip the covers off and you see a Ford Escort.
What? It looks like, the door doesn't even look like, it looks like it's had a sort of another door put on it. It's got very, very low mileage, like 2,000 miles or something on it. And it's got, to describe it, it looks like a three-door Escort with a body kit on it and a whale-tailed spoiler on the back. But it's very unremarkable. It's sort of factory fresh because it's so low mileage and new looking, but God, dear, it's a bit. What do you think?
Well, not a lot, to be honest. I think if you asked the person in the street and you dragged out an XR3i and put it next to that, most people, apart from the big whale-tail spoiler, would struggle to realise why that was worth so much money. I don't really get it, to be honest, apart from the fact they didn't make that many, and that one only had a few thousand miles, but it passed me by. I don't really get the fast forward thing full stop, because they were never really that particularly well built. So they always felt a bit cheap, even straight off the production line. So I was kind of underwhelmed by that, to be honest. But obviously somebody's very keen on it and enjoy it.
Yeah, there was some cars went for big numbers up there, actually. Given all the auction up and downs we've seen over this year, there was a Lancia Stratos from 1975 that had a bit of rallying history, and that went for 298,000. So there's some stuff went for big money. So obviously, the foreign markets look at the NEC one perhaps more than they do the other stuff. Where would that Escort Cosworth Go for 200 grand? It's got to go into a collection, hasn't it, surely?
Well, it'd probably be nicked and there'd be handbrake turn around the supermarket car park, because that's where most of them went, isn't it? Let's face it. I'm guessing it's a collection car, isn't it? Whether you'd put that on a plinth and stare at it at night with a glass of whiskey in your hand, I'm not convinced. But somebody's obviously into them.
Is there a danger, though, with those values, though? You know, I mean, you're taking a bit of a gamble that they're always that's going to be a thing that's going to stay up there and be desirable, because 200 grand is quite a lot to punt on that car staying at that level, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think really they're that historically significant. I remember the last big number that we talked about wasn't it Princess Diana's Escort, which went for a big number. I can't remember what. But that kind of had a history to it, didn't it? Because it was Princess Diana's. But this, it doesn't really seem that special to me. And obviously whoever bought it may be listening to this gnashing their teeth. But it just doesn't seem that great. I can't get that excited about it.
Was there anything else that caught your eyes from that, from remotely from your sickbed? Was there anything else that you
I did watch some of the auction from a sickbed, actually, and there was this thing going on at the moment. Another car, but this time a car from Stuttgart that is selling for big numbers at the moment. And I think for us, it's a talking point. So let's talk Teutonic turbos. Yeah, so I was looking at the results from the NEC and I was really interested to see Porsche turbos getting more and more expensive. Now, we've talked in the past about loads of stuff getting cheaper. 911 turbos are just getting more and more expensive. So, Exhibit 1, here's a super rare 911 930 Turbo LE. So this is the late 930 Turbo, went for £208,000. It's on your screen now. So, you know, it's a 1980s 911. It's a 1989 one, so it's very late. The LEs were the special edition. They threw every gadget they had in the box on them. This one's only done 20,000 miles. I think they only made 50 or so because it went to all the Porsche dealerships in the country at the time. So it is very rare, but still, it sold for £208,000. I don't really get it on this Porsche turbos, to be honest, because they're great, but are they that great? What do you think?
Well, it's a lot of money for a hand warmer, but you know, it's a bit better than that blooming diamond white Escort. At least that looks like something you would, as you say, put on a plinth and sit in a leather chair and look at. I'm not sure about the values, but you know, obviously, you know, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and desirability and scarcity and all that sort of stuff. But at least I would think I've got something for my money. But it does kick them out of the park for a lot of people, though, doesn't it?
It does, and I really like them. In fact, I love these 911 930 turbos, but I'm just questioning, are they worth the money? And what's happening now is cars like that LE, which is very rare, 50 odd so made, are dragging up the prices of other 911 turbos. So again, on your screen, here's one that sold at the NEC as well. This is a 1980 930 3.3 turbo. So this is the C16 UK supplied right-hand drive one. Again, a very nice car, but this sold for $168,000. So when we're watching most auction results, seeing the prices of classic cars going down, these 911 turbos seem to be kicking the trend. And it's really interesting because they're great, but they're not that great. You know, they're not that exciting. And also the turbos, you know, they do have a bit of a history. They have a bit of a reputation as a widowmaker. That's what they used to be called, because the turbo boost can come in halfway round a corner. And it's very much an on-off switch, the turbo boost. It's off, it's off, it's off, and then suddenly, whoa, it's on, and you take off. They are a right to drive. I do love them. I absolutely love them. I'm just thinking, is it really worth all that money?
This is the car that takes you for a spin rather than the other way around, isn't it? This
Yeah,
one. But
exactly.
that's probably why they've become desirable, perhaps. I noticed with that one that you just mentioned, it's in Guards Red, that one. The first thing it says is it's had a recent body and mechanical restoration. And yet again, it might be this thing of like, you know, we've spent so much money on it, we want to get our money back on it. I do wonder, as these things tick up in prices, whether they're going to fall into the E-Type trap or the Pagoda trap of like becoming very expensive, very desirable, and then the floor falls out from underneath it in terms of not literally the car, but, you know, in terms of the value. That is a worry. But I think, you know, Porsche's the 911 is iconic anyway, but I think when you put those driving dynamics into it, I think that's what, as time marches forward, that's what we're getting further and further away from, really, isn't it? Because most modern cars are getting bland, whereas this thing, by the sounds of it, had an element of surprise. You didn't know whether you were going to end up in A&E.
Yeah, exactly, or dead, as the case may be. But I mean, he did go backwards in them a lot. They are great fun, and they do take a lot of mastering. So I can see why, as a challenge to drive, they're really good. Are they that much more of a challenge of a normal 1970s, 1980s 911? probably not that much. They do go very quick, so they are very exciting. But what I thought is that maybe 911 turbos are a bit of a bubble. So if you're into your turbos, great, but probably worth avoiding those for the time being, like you said, like the E-Type bubble and the Pagoda bubble. But I thought, let's have a look at some other turbos that you can get without spending six figures. You can get that punchy turbo thrill for a lot cheaper. You know how we like the cheap alternatives to this. My first thought about this is popping up on your screen now, is the Lotus Esprit Turbo. Now, this is from 1982. It's in the black John Player Special colour, so it just looks amazing. If you're thinking about which Lotus Esprit is it, this is the one from the James Bond For Your Eyes Only film, not the early one for The Spy Who Loved Me, the white ones. This is the red one that blew up with a ski rack on the top. Great Lotus Esprit turbos. This one is £38,000. And you've got to say, in black and the John Player Special colours, in that beautiful wedgy shape, it looks worth every penny, I think.
Yeah, it does look really, really good. It's not quite as, I was going to say it's not quite as iconic as a 911, but it is iconic. I don't know. Biggest problem with these is I kind of think, how am I going to fit in that? Because you sort of have to post yourself in them, don't you? They're a bit like an old E-Type.
Yeah, and a bit the Lotus of the 1980s. When you do finally fit in them, you look around the interior and it's like, ugh, because it's all looking a bit cheap. It was all glued together. The glues come apart over time. The leather looks really cheap and creased, and the interiors let them down, to be honest. The exteriors look great. The interiors are a bit of a weak point on them, but they're not as tail happy as the 911s. They do handle really well. 0 to 60 around 5.5 seconds, 200 brake horsepower. They improved the chassis on these Series 2s because they're about to put the V8 in them. So they actually do handle really well. So I think a Lotus Esprit is actually, for £38,000 as a turbo, is a great alternative.
Okay, so that's one alternative to an overpriced 911 turbo. What else you got?
The next one, this is about as 1980s as a VHS tape. This is the Renault 5 Turbo, a 1986 Renault 5 Turbo. You'll recognise these because most in the 1990s and 2000s were slammed there on the floor and they were absolutely wrecked. But this is a nice, genuine silver Renault 5 Turbo with that nice body kit. It's got the yellow fog lights, which are always illuminated. It's got the 1.4 engine with a turbo on it. And in its time, these were quick cars. They were very light, 850 kilograms for a Renault 5 Turbo. I mean, that is just nothing. It was quicker than a Peugeot 205 GTI 1.6. It's definitely quicker than Volkswagen GTI of the time. They had terrible build quality. You're certain to die in any crash. But I think Renault 5 Turbos now are super cool.
Have you been on too much night nurse? That's horrible.
Oh no, well, that is not horrible. These things drive like absolute stink because they're so light. I mean, they're I think they're even lighter than a current Lotus Elise. They're so light. They're great cars. Build quality is awful. They'll fall apart in your hands.
I'd want that to spin into a hedge. That one. It doesn't need to have anybody in it. Just spin into a wall on its own. No, yeah, that's horrible.
I mean, they're not built well, but I think they're a great drive, and it's a great bit of 80s retro hot hatch. It's probably the ultimate hot hatch of the 80s that just doesn't get recognised. Yeah,
well, if you could get it started, I think it's worth a go. But that's it. I don't want to take that home. Thanks very much. Don't fancy yours much.
But £13,950, and this is in really good condition. Amazingly, it's done 125,000 miles. God knows how, because they used to fall apart after about 50,000 miles. But I think that's a really good buy.
No. I mean, at least with the Porsche, it's got a bit of cachet. There must be a Porsche with a turbo that we can afford, though. I mean, with your extensive knowledge off the internet, is there anything you found?
Okay, yeah, here is a Porsche, and it is a turbo. This is the Porsche 944 Turbo. Now, this one in front of you is so beautiful, I'm tempted to go and have a look at this next week. It's a 1987 nautical blue Porsche 944 Turbo. This one had ABS. Now, the 944s, everybody, a bit like the XJS, everybody's been saying, next year will be the time of the 944. It's never really arrived, but that means it's still a bargain, particularly compared to those 911s. If you're paying $200,000 for a 911 turbo, you can pay $20,000 for this 1987 Porsche Turbo. It just happens to be a 944. But I think they look great. They handle really nicely. They're less likely to spit you into the side of the road because they've got quite a nice chassis. And the turbo can be tweaked for a lot more power than you get in a 911. I think 944s are great, and they seem to be suspiciously cheap still.
So these are the ones with the pop-up headlights for those people like me who don't really understand what the numbers.
Yeah, you'd know
Porsche
even
numbers.
you would know what a 944 is, wouldn't you? It's an 80s Porsche, so it's not the 924 because it came after that and it came before the 968. So everybody knows a 944.
Yeah, it's the numbers I find confusing on Porsches. This is the one
the numbers
that's
getting too much for you, dear.
They're a little bit too much. Yes, this is the long coupe looking one with the pop-up headlights for those of us in the real world who are not Porsche nerds.
That's a great deal. 21,995 from a dealer, 135,000 miles, unmarked nautical blue, nice interior. Porsche 944s go on forever. They're really tough. Peak build quality for Porsche. That is a great buy.
No, the thing is, I'm going to sound like Andy off Little Britain. I don't want that one. I've seen the nice 911 from the 80s. I want that one. So how do I get that one for not so much money? Was there a version of it that's not as expensive, or is it they're all turbos and they're all overpriced now?
They're all 930 turbos are worth a fortune. I don't think there's one on the market at the moment in the UK for less than 100,000. I mean, you can buy later 911s, like a 997 turbo is really good value. You can get those for 50 or 60, but you're not going to get a 930 turbo for less than six figures. They've just completely moved out of the enthusiast sphere, and they've become that awful thing in classic cars, which is it's an investment, and then nobody ever drives them.
Well, what do you think of Max's picks? Can you name a turbo alternative to a 911 that would be better bang for our buck? Let us know. You can contact us via our Instagram feed, which is at the Tyre Kickers UK. Yes, you're listening to episode 22 of the Tyre Kickers. Still to come, we'll talk more auction action at Historics that's just happened at Brooklands. But Max and I were reminiscing recently. I think it's a sign we're getting old. And like a lot of old people, we've started asking if things were better in the old days, like driving and going on those big, long road trips. In modern cars, of course, you've got all the gear these days. But was it more fun back in the day?
I'm not sure it was, because just think back to the horror of the 1970s family road trip. So you're in a car, there was no aircon, no sat-nav, no screens in the headrests, no touchscreens to play games on. It was just you, your shorts, and vinyl seats.
Well, also, there was the element of the travel as well. There's a lot of things we take for granted. So let's cast our mind back to the 70s and the 80s for a bit of fun and try and remember what it was really like. I should caveat this by saying that Max and I are still, obviously so young that we were just kids or teens in the 70s and early 80s, not so much in the late 80s.
Maybe not late 80s, yeah.
But let's try and figure out if it was more fun or not, because there were lots of elements that had changed. And I think one is the cars, Max, and the other is the journey, and the other is the environment. So just to break those down. So obviously the cars, the technology has changed. We can talk about that. The journey itself was a different experience. Was there more traffic, less traffic? But there was also then the environment. So the fact that you can stop anywhere now and get food and drink is a given now, and you couldn't do that before. You will be tipped upside down, and the money will be extracted from you, shaken out of you if you stop for a coffee these days. But back in the 70s and 80s, things were a lot kind of more basic, weren't they?
Well, this is the time, remember, before bottled water was invented. So we didn't have bottled water. I don't know how we survived, but we managed to survive without bottled water. I remember just having those huge 1 litre bottles of R. White's lemonade in the back to share with my sister, which is great, isn't it? You've got a couple of kids and then fill them full of sugar and see what happens on a long road trip.
You're obviously quite posh, because we had the used again bottle of R. White's lemonade that was filled up with squash.
Squash, okay, right.
Which was warm, because it was sat in the car. But there was no, I think it wasn't acceptable to stop off and get a drink somewhere, because there wasn't the choice, but also it was just seen as a bit of a decadence, wasn't it?
But also, you didn't stop, because you know that what would happen, that would ruin and block capitals the time, because any dad of any caliber in the 1970s was obsessed about getting from A to B as quick as possible. And it was all about the journey times in our family. No stopping for food, no stopping for a wee. You just had to hold it for 3 hours in misery, because you had to get there as quick as possible. Because when you arrived at your destination, all the dads would have to stand around there and lie about how quickly they got here. Oh, yeah, it took me 3 hours to get from Land's End to John O'Groats. But you're in a Marina 1.3. How is that physically possible? But yeah, dads would just lie. Speeding was kind of encouraged, wasn't it? It was sign of a kind of macho thing, and there were no speed cameras to be trapping people, so you just went flat out. I remember my dad achieving ridiculous speeds in a Rover SD1, through France because you just felt like you could. And if you got caught by the gendarme, then that was part of the game.
Well, also, I think in terms of, and we're talking to 70s and 80s here, but I think even up to the end of the end of the 90s, probably middle 2000s, you could drive on a motorway as long as you were sensible and read the road and kept under a ton. You were probably, moving along at the same speed as a lot of people. But, since the cameras came in and those blooming average speed cameras and those variable speed cameras, I think one thing you definitely do now is you don't enjoy driving so much because you're just watching the speedo all the time. Back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you were freer, weren't you? Maybe you didn't feel like you were free when you're broken down on the hard shoulder of the A30.
Well, that was the other thing. One of the things that came with speeding was overheating. And so how many cars did you used to see on those hot 70s summers parked by the side of the road with just steam pouring out of them and people trying to pour R. White's lemonade or squash into it to try and cool it down? Because overheating was a big thing, particularly if you pulled a caravan. If you tied a caravan to the back of your 1.3 or 1.8 Marina, it was virtually guaranteed to overheat at the first sign of a hill. So overheating and breaking down was another big thing. You don't see that so much now.
Just coming back to in-flight catering, again, I think the 70s and 80s were money was tight. People didn't have as much disposable income as they had, maybe used to have, did, whatever. Spending on stuff that wasn't necessary, I think, was seen by your parents as an extravagance. So my kids would expect to get in the car now and like, oh, I want something to eat. Can I have a frappuccino latte, blah, 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 and a toasted panini and such. Like, oh, can we stop here? Oh, it's Starbucks. Whereas now, you wouldn't have done that. One, because Starbucks didn't exist, but two, that was seen as like, who do you think you are? Here, have a Marmite and cheese sandwich that's been sat in a not very cool box for 4 hours.
Marmite and cheese. I think your memory is playing tricks on you because sandwiches had one filling. It had one. You had a ham sandwich, and then that was it. I'm not sure we had two fillings, but you're right. The catering was pretty basic. The thermos flask came out to dispense boiling hot liquid when you're doing 90 miles, avoiding the police.
No cup holders either.
And that was being sprayed all over your legs and stuff. So the thermos flask, the sandwiches came out, and I think that was about it. I don't think you were allowed to stop off. There was no kind of stopping off, certainly in our family, at Happy Eaters.
It was a special journey though if the tin of travel sweets came out and the dusty offerings were offered at the back.
So you could choke on them,
or you might have had some opal fruits if it was a special journey. But you stocked up on stuff. The stuff that you did take with you was stuff that we don't take anymore, which is like spares. You used to take the spare fan belt and used to take a spare because it was a bit of a dice with the odds, wasn't it? Whether you were going to get there or not. So you pack those. Roadmap. You used to pack a roadmap because even though your dad who was driving would claim that he knew where he was going.
He didn't need to. Yeah, exactly.
Didn't need a map.
Then the roadmap would trigger the mum and dad roadmap argument about who was right, saying you should have turned left a mile ago.
And also, it was quite, as kids, it was quite boring in the back, wasn't it? Which is, where the expression "Are we there yet?" comes from. But it was quite boring. I mean, I remember, and I mentioned this on my dad's car podcast I did recently. I said I sort of picked up my sort of Rain Man style ability to recognise cars from their body parts just by having to find something to do on the journeys, which is looking out the window and seeing the side or front of the car and trying to work out what it was before the back arrived, and you could read the specification and the model off the back, which is very, very nerdy. But there was nothing to do. I mean, apart from an I Spy book, it was pretty boring, wasn't it?
Well, I'm surprised you had a view out because we had towels trapped in the window. So the wind-up window would be wound up. You'd stick a towel in the top and then wind it to the top to trap towels in the window to block the sun out so we wouldn't get too hot in the back.
So
we couldn't see anything. Exactly. You could look out the back and then look out the front. I was just obsessed by watching the gauges and checking the speedo. But you couldn't look out the sides because there was always towels in it. And then if you went quickly around a corner, the towel would sort of flash out into the rest of the car and knock you out. So, yeah, I don't remember looking out the back window, to be honest. It was just like the sight of a towel.
No seatbelts, though. They didn't come until like the early 90s or something.
You could fight on the back seat all day long, couldn't you, with absolutely no restraints now. So that was quite good.
How good a traveller were you? Because I was thinking my brother, was it me? No, I think it was my brother who used to get very car sick. So those pills used to get dished out, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right, the car
pills.
sickness pills. Yeah, my sister always used to get car sick. And also my dad would always have about 30 cigarettes on the go. So you just have this fog, this choking smog of cigarette smoke, and my sister wanting to vomit into one of the towels. And then there'd be me in the back checking out the temperature gauge on the car because I was obsessed about how the car engine was going. So I can't remember that they were great times, to be honest. I think they were different times. I can't imagine that kids today would like that because some of our journeys, as we got more exotic in the late 70s, we drove down to northern Spain in a couple of Rover SD1s over a series of years, and they were done flat out, those journeys, as to not interrupt the time. And I think you'd be going for 22 hours just with some garage pit stops and stuff. And Dad would just be half asleep at the wheel, doing 120, trying to get there as quick as possible. So it was more of a feat of endurance, I think. I don't think your kids would do that kind of thing. They'd probably revolt and ring up Childline.
Your dad was a car dealer, wasn't he? Were those SD1s, were they just demonstrators off the forecourt?
They were borrowed SD1s, yeah, and they went back with 3,000 miles on the clock after 2 weeks.
Sold as nearly new.
Never left the country, honestly. What's that GB badge doing on his bag?
What's this, duty free?
Stank of smoke and vomit.
So you're listening to the Tyre Kickers. We mentioned earlier some big numbers of the NEC auction, but what's going on elsewhere in auction land? Well, Max and I decided to drop in on the November Historics sale a few days ago at Mercedes-Benz World in Brooklands in Surrey. Now, Max, what do you think of the selection out there?
Some interesting 90s stuff. What I am noticing at the moment in auctions, and this is the last couple of auctions I've been to, is there just seems to be loads and loads of left-hand drive Mercedes Pagodas. Now, what is going on with the left-hand drive supply? Have they all been dumped at one point? And I'm waiting for the left-hand drive supply of Pagodas to drag the right-hand drive prices down, because that would be nice.
One of the left-hand Pagodas didn't make very much money at all. So, yeah, let's hope so. Because you and I would both like a right-hand drive Pagoda.
Yeah. For £20,000, please.
And our plan was to stop talking about them on the show so that the values would come down. But now we've done it again. Oh, no. Now, we did our usual thing of when we walk around, didn't we, of trying to guess the prices. Now, I will say that I used to be quite good at this. A couple of years ago, I was able to kind of hit the nail on the head, wasn't I? But it's not easy anymore.
Oh, the prices are all over the place, though. That's the reason, isn't it? Should we get straight into it? Because we've got quite a few to get through here. Number one, we stood next to this and went, oh. Then we sat in it and went, oh. So it's a Daimler 66, a 1990 Daimler 66 Series 3. This was no reserve. I quite like this when I sat inside. It's that kind of maroon red colour. It had a kind of like... what kind of biscuit or sable interior. I said it would go for 7,500. You said it would go for 8,000. What did it actually go for?
It went for 5,148. So $5,000, basically.
$5,000. That's cheap, isn't it? Because we both liked that when we sat inside.
We fancy getting on like a ferry to Calais and just doing a bit of a road trip, didn't we?
It's a booze cruise for your kind of Essex boozer, isn't it? And that's what you are. You're an Essex pub landlord going across the channel to get some cheap mixers in the back of your Daimler 66.
Now, the 66 was parked outside where, the cars that they don't mind getting rained on are. But upstairs in the posh bit was this 1968 MGC GT. Now, this was very pretty. It's had, I think, a nut and bolt, actually, but it was really, really nice, just presented really nice in green, British Racing green, exactly how you'd expect a good-looking MGB, or in this case, an MGC, to look like. From every angle, it looked nice. It just looked the pucker thing. The interior was really nice, a nice sort of cream leather interior inside. Everything just looked right on it, didn't it?
Yeah, this was really, really nice. I don't think I've seen a nicer MGC than this. And it's one of those cars that if you wanted to buy it and, again, put it on a plinth and sit and look at it with a glass of whiskey, it would be great because it was virtually flawless. We had a really good look round at this and we couldn't find a single problem with the restoration. So that is a good car. What did that go for?
Well, you had the book and you're writing down the guesses. You said 28k, I said 32k. And again, we were guided by the guide prices, which I think was my error here. It actually went for 29,744 all up. So it didn't make the guide. I think the guide was about 28.
Strong money for an MGC, but it was a really beautiful one, wasn't it? I really liked that car. I think it was an absolute corker.
I think it was one of those cars that we said, actually, that if you missed it, you'd take you in a year to find another one that was that good, because you're pulling a face a bit about it. I'm not that bothered. I said, yeah, but if you don't buy that car, you're going to have to go and look and wear out a lot of shoe leather to find another one. So that's possibly why it went for that money.
Good car, good buy. You were pulling a face at this, which is a 1997 Mercedes SL60 AMG. Now, these are really rare. I've only ever seen 3 of these for sale. This was 38,000 miles, the R129 SL, which came after the Bobby Ewing one. The SL60 was the 6-litre V8. I really think this was a great car. It had 38,000 miles. I would have loved to have bought this if I could have afforded it. Interestingly, I said it should go for 49,000. You said 55,000. And it went right for 55,000. You're right on the money there.
I know. Regrettably, I don't think it's worth 55,000. I've got to say, and that's that. Well, I've got full disclosure. I want my CLK 55 to be worth more rather than plummeting in value, which it currently is. So, yeah, you like this. I think the colour was nice on it. That it's that nice sort of rich blue metallic with the light cream tan interior, and obviously the engine under the bonnet is the thing that makes it. But I don't know. Just these 90s, the R129 era
90s.
SLs.
Your best friend Paul Cowland says the 90s is where it's at.
Well, you and him can agree. I think I sort of disagree on that. Anyway, moving on swiftly. One of the hero cars was up parked in prime position. 1962 Series 1 flat floor E-Type. Now, my knowledge of E-Types isn't great, but you explain the flat floor is the one that the collectors want.
Yeah, it's the really early one, basically. And then they worked out quite early in production that nobody could fit in them. So they built a bit more of the floor down a bit. So you got a bit more space for your legs and your feet. But the flat floor is very early. This is a 62, original UK right-hand drive, been beautifully restored in a kind of maroon colour with a red interior. I was wetting myself about this car. I thought this was absolutely gorgeous.
Now, it was guided upwards of 95. So again, we took the guide price and use that as our thing. And I think that's what they do to lure you in a little bit. I think that the auctioneers as a whole use this trick of giving you a guide price, and then that anchors the price. In selling psychology, that anchors the price. And so they've set the price first. So you if you feel like you say, well, I don't think it's worth that, you feel like you're going against the wisdom. And I think that's something, especially in the market at the moment, I think you've got to be cautious of. Yeah, so you said 95. I said no sale. And the hammer went down on a lower figure. But looking at the sale result now, it said it's sold for 95.5. Now, I wonder whether the hammer went down at a lower one and it went for provisional and then went off to get negotiated. A lot of cars were selling on provisional bids on that one. So that's gone for 95.5, according to the Historics auction site, which then was bang on guide. So
yeah, absolutely. And I still think for that quality of E-Type, for a 62 flat floor Series 1, I think 95 is still relatively cheap. But then the E-Type prices are falling. And I think the problem with that is that people want to buy an E-Type are going to wait until they fall a bit more in 6 months' time. So it's a bit of a difficult E-Type market.
Now, we were talking about Escorts being overpriced. I think BMW CSI is a bit overpriced as well. This one we saw next, this grey one, I've got to say, in the flesh, it didn't do it for me. It wasn't all that. I thought it was a little bit tatty, actually. What did you think?
Yeah, you had a right grump about this. Let me just explain what this is, though. It's a 1989 BMW M635 CSI. Here comes the big word, manual, because most of these were automatic and the auto box wasn't great on it. A manual M635 CSI from 1989, I thought this was really good. They're very, very rare, this, but when we went to have a look at it, it was a bit tattier than I thought. There's a fair few rust bubbles around the back, which I wasn't expecting, and it'd done 114,000 miles and the interior showed it. I thought this was going to go for a lot more than it did, actually. I kind of guessed it was going to go for about 34,000, and you guessed it was going to go for 30,000. And actually what happened is it split us right down the middle. It went for 32,000.
Yeah, so we were between the two there, so it wasn't too bad. A few more to get through. A 2002 Bentley Continental R, a Mulliner wide body, which you got quite excited about. I just sort of shrugged when you said wide body. It was in the wrong colour for me. It was a silver Continental, so it's on a O2 plate. And what colour was every car on an O2? It was silver.
Yeah.
I think it was nice in the flesh. It didn't really do it for me, but you got quite excited about this, didn't you?
Because it's the wide body, so there's not that many wide bodies made. Interestingly, these Continental Rs, they've been in free fall for the last 2 years. They're getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. This wide body did all right. I think I said it should go for about 43. You didn't like it that much at all. You said it should go for 39. It actually sold for 47,000 because of that wide body rarity, I think. So that did quite well. I was quite surprised about that.
We were talking about the fact that a lot of modern cars, the interiors are a bit unremarkable now, but there's something about a Bentley when you get in.
That's a statement interior, that, isn't it? You would just love every time you got in that.
Another car that caught my interest up on the upper floor was a 1962 Sunbeam Alpine with Le Mans racing heritage. It looked the part. It looked like a great car to add to a collection. Patinaed green rally car, black spoke wheels, white hard top on it. Looked the thing, had the provenance, the interior looked pucker, and I think it still had the ability to go racing now. So that was really, really interesting.
I didn't really get this, to be honest. I think it had a bit of racing heritage. So I think racing heritage gives it a kind of value that probably a non-racing one doesn't have. I didn't really get it. I think I was suggesting that should go for 66,000. You said it should go for 88,000.
And it went for 88.
88
Bang
on the
nose. Yeah. See, I think you're just a bit of a snob, really. I think if that was a Porsche, you'd get very excited about it.
Oh, God, yeah.
It's a Sunbeam Alpine.
Well, it's because it's yours, isn't it? So automatically, I've got a downer on it. I thought, well, it's going to drive that.
Two-time Le Mans competitor, FIA papers valid until 2026. That would make not only a great addition to a collection, but you could get out and use it and have some fun in it. I think that was a good buy for somebody, that one. And our last one of our picks was outside in the, what would you call that zone outside? I wouldn't call it the unloved zone. It was just
Well, it was the kind of cheap zone, wasn't it, really, basically? It's where we found the most stuff we were interested in because it was cheap. It was stuck outside in the rain and the ice and the snow, so it didn't present that greatly. But this is a 1974 Mercedes-Benz 350 SL. So one of the early SLs, the Bobby Ewings, had the V8. We both had a good poke around this, and it was really nice. The problem with the early ones is they do rust and rust and rust and rust. But this one was nice. It was blue. It had a nice interior, white wall tyres. It had the matching hubcaps and the roof. I was surprised about how cheaply this was guided. We both said, interestingly, we both reckon it would go for the same amount, 16,000. And I actually went for 12,000, £12,012. So that is a super, super cheap car.
Yeah, the hammer fell at about 10, and obviously the fee to go on top. But for 12 grand, that's great. You get a V8 there. The interior had been really nicely, newly retrimmed in blue. Sometimes these SL interiors can look a bit tatty. You are getting the 70s car, but I quite like the 70s car because they've got the coloured hubcaps that match. It was on quite a nice plate as well, MER 350A for the 350. It presented really well. It spent a lot of time in Australia, and it'd been brought back to the UK. It had some money spent, and I'd say when you opened the door, the interior was really, really nice on that. So I really fancied that one, and if I was in the market for an SL, I would have bid for that. I was quite enjoying. There were a few SLs, weren't they, like yours that you've bought, the 107, and I was quite enjoying the fact going around and saying to Max, "Do you think this one's cheaper than you paid?"
Yeah, they all turned out to be a lot cheaper than I paid, actually. I'm trying to come up with a reason for that. It's just the reason is I think I overpaid for mine. But I think one of the problems with the earlier ones, the pre-86, is they're not galvanized. So if you do get the classic rusty bulkhead on this, then you're going to be spending more than you've paid for the car because it can be between 15 and 20,000 to put right properly. So I think that's always the risk with these SLs. But that one, because it had been in Australia for £12,000, I'd take the risk.
I think it was an interesting auction. I did dip in and watch it, a little bit of it live, and the stuff was not catching fire perhaps as early as they'd hoped.
It wasn't flying off the shelves, let's face it, was it?
No, they were starting bidding at 10,000 and then looking around the room and nobody was blinking, and then they dropped to 5. And then the bidding started. And there was one point the auctioneer turned around. Actually, it was a couple of occasions the auctioneer turned around and said, well, why didn't you bid when I said 10,000? And I thought, well, that's not really how an auction works, is it? You keep your paddle down and you keep your powder dry until the very last minute, and then you start entering the race. Otherwise, all you're doing is forcing the price up. So I think there was a lot of stuff. I noticed a trend that a lot of stuff was not starting at the price they wanted to start at. They were having to lower the bids. They were having to go into smaller increments. And a lot of stuff didn't hit guide, but there was some good bargains to be had. So it just pays to keep an eye on those auctions. As ever, and I did have to sort of pinch myself and remind myself of this. The stuff like that, Mercedes 350 SL, you don't get to test drive it. You don't get to inspect it. You can look at the papers, so you are taking a gamble. So whereas you could get something like that 74 SL for 12 grand, it could be perfect, but you could also be buying a heap of problems, which you don't get from a dealer quite so much because you can get under it or you can get an expert under it. So there is always that risk, isn't there, with auctions?
Yeah, and those in particular, the parts are very expensive and they're very expensive to fix and they do rust. That auction was really interesting because it was November. It's the end of the season. Prices are all over the place. And I think still nobody's got any money in this country. So I think classic car prices are having that kind of correction. What'll be interesting is to see what happens next year. Does that correction continue? Do we still see falling prices? Or will things like a 12 grand SL be the bottom of the market?
Well, let's stick some fuel in both the petrol tanks for that 66 and let's head to the continent, Max, and we can mull it over.
Just one point here. I've been keeping a score here about the prices. I was closest to the sale price on 4, and you were closest to the sale price on 4. So for the first time for us, there's nothing to argue about. It's a draw.
Well, we're nearly done, but first, you'll remember a couple of episodes back, we started the quest to find the best daily driver classic. Now, I suggested a Saab 900, a Mercedes 123, and a Daimler Coupe. Max, apart from an old man Rover P6, I can't remember your other suggestions. I think they were just because they were so dull.
It was a Rover P6 3500S, which was the manual, so that's why it was a good suggestion. I think as normal, my choices were far better informed than yours. My other picks were a Saab 99, so we went for strangely the same kind of thing. Mine was a bit more classic. And also the Range Rover Classic, particularly at the moment as the heavens have opened, they'd make great daily drivers. So for reasons I told you at the time, I think mine were the best.
Well, we threw it out to you lot and on Instagram, so let's rattle through your reactions, some agreement and some disagreement, some other suggestions as well. Sam at Southern Cars UK says that her favourite modern classics that she's run for a while have been a Mercedes CL500 and a Porsche 996. She said she also dailied a Shadow for a summer a couple of years ago, and it was brilliant. She says, any well-sorted 80s car will serve as a daily, but my current favourite is a Porsche 928 S4. My children despair.
Oh, that is a good choice, the S4, but they are very complicated when they go wrong, the 928s. Mr. Doberbenz is backing Mercedes. He says either a W115 saloon, a W123 saloon, or a W124 saloon, which is my choice as well, except I was banned from saying it. They'll do the job. Easy to find official parts, bomb-proof, and only going one way in value.
Simon Green Motoring agrees and also adds a Swede to the mix, saying a Saab 900 is a great shout, as is the Mercedes 123 or 124. But he says a Chevrolet Caprice will be his ultimate choice, though.
Oh, a Chevy Caprice. That's nice until you come to park it in the supermarket. 350 Monroe says he's currently doing the daily in a Mercedes W116 450 SEL. That's nice. Big again, though. But he'd love a P6 3500S, obviously, he's a sensible person, or a Jag or Daimler Coupe, but only the V12. Cool.
Nightfall Drive says, hear me out, but how about a 1980s Lotus Excel? Practical and rust-proof body, lots of Toyota underpinnings, and a tried and tested four-pot.
Yeah, 4-pot, that's the downer for me. Car Show Boards UK says he used to daily a Saab 900. He sold it with 180,000 miles on the clock, and it was still going strong with very few issues.
I can believe that as well. Boy Gould 2020 says it's Saab or Merc for me if you actually want to get where you are going. Although he says my heart says an XJ Coupe.
Lots more comments and suggestions on our Instagram at the Tyre Kickers UK. So go and check them out and discover your next classic daily. I have had a thought since we started talking about this though. Surely the ultimate would be an MGB GT because every single part is available. Yeah. They're nice and small. They are easy to drive. They're quite good fun. Surely that would be, and neither of us mentioned this at the time, the ultimate daily driver.
I think it's a good shout. If you drive an MGB GT as a daily, drop us a line.
So thank goodness you and we have finally made it to the end. Thanks again for listening and spreading the word. We really do appreciate it.
So until the next time, keep wishing, wanting, dreaming and scheming about classic cars, and we'll see you very soon.
Or I could have pre-read it, of course. But
Why change the habit of a lifetime?